Hello everybody, Pretzel Road here, and welcome back to another Cities Skylines video. So today I want to talk to you about my top 10 tips for building a suburb in Cities Skylines. So I don't really have much of an introduction to it, so let's just get right into the main part of the video. So tip number 1 is separating your suburbs, from the rest of your city using a highway. Now, obviously in this example city, it's only the suburb, but if we were to have a main city, it would either be across this highway, preferably with a bit of distance created by some lower density commercial or maybe some high density residential, something like that, or we would have it sort of maybe over here, following that same idea. So that's tip number 1, is separate it from the city using highways. Highways are kind of an important part of a city. Tip number 2, grid, not grid. Now what does this mean? Well, basically, it means that you'll follow a rough overarching grid pattern. You'll notice here that sort of the large portions of this are grids. There are a lot of 90-degree turns, 90-degrey angles, and all of that. But then you also will see curves. You'll see I use a lot of curved roads. And yeah, just using even like a 90-degree curved road can have a massive impact on the way that your city looks. Basically what you're doing there is you're sort of making your roads neat without making them too neat. You want to make them look clean, but you're also trying to prevent them from looking too strict and too boxy, because then they end up looking boring and very, like, dense urban core style. So that's my second tip. Third tip, separate out your shopping using shopping malls. So your commercial areas in a downtown area would probably just be lining large streets like this, but you don't necessarily want that in a suburb. You want a little bit of space. You largely in these sorts of areas, you're trying to separate out the residential from everything else, except for the most critical of services. And so what that means is that shopping gets moved out and into shopping malls like this. And what you can see is that I've built a parking lot over here. That's cool, sort of adding a little bit of depth to it, making it more convincing and making it feel, again, a little bit more separated out. Is just by creating these roads that are sort of separated just very lightly, and you create these sort of tightly packed roads that turn into a parking lot-ish look. Maybe I'll make a video on those at some point. Number 4 is the parking lots, the aforementioned parking lots. Again, you can also add a little bit of depth to your parking lots by taking away a couple of islands here and there and putting in these isolated shops. Again, you're just sort of trying to separate things that aren't houses out from the rest of your city. Number 5 is main roads. So, when you're when you're building in a city like that, when you're building in a suburb, you don't want all of your houses to be next to main roads, but you also don't want your thoroughfare going through these little residential areas. So what you do is you create these main roads, and you want to build the actual places where people live a little bit separated out from that. You want to build these actual residential areas coming off of the road, and there will be a little bit more on that later. But first, I want to get to tip number 6. Take advantage of buses and the various bus types that we have. So you'll notice that here I have two bus types. Number one is the biofuel bus. And the biofuel bus, you could also use a normal bus here. I, in this case, use, and I think would make the most sense for just using to connect your suburbs to other sections of the city. And crucially, you also want these to only go along the aforementioned main roads. But then I also use these school buses, and they connect the schools to the rest of the area. School buses don't actually keep out non-student sims, but they do allow for the, they do just sort of add a little bit more depth to your city. Again, it just feels a little bit more alive and a little bit more real when you have these school buses mixed in with your system. And these ones don't use the main roads. They only really use these back roads where the people are living. Tip number 7, avoid too many intersections. This sort of goes along with my grid not grid point. But that is that you don't want to have this feel like a city where you're like constantly in stop and go traffic. So you'll have large stretches of road which have more sparse connections to the, you have large sections of main road with more sparse connections to the outside roads, and this also helps to sort of keep traffic flowing nicely. So that's sort of both a practical and stylistic tip. Tip number 8, blank space is good, blank space is bad. So when you're building a suburb, you don't necessarily want your whole city, you don't want the whole thing to feel like super packed together, because again, this is not an urban core. You want it to feel a little bit more sprawled out. So that's why we have these little bits of blank space. But you also want to be careful with blank space, because if you have too much blank space, then it feels empty, and it feels either like a rural area or it just feels unfinished. So you want to have enough blank space to make it feel like it's not too dense, but you also want little enough that it doesn't feel unfinished. Tip number 9, main road separation. Always separate residential from main roads, at least with low-density residential. Always do that. You'll notice here, the way that I've done this is very simple. It's just 1 block away, up to 1 block away from the main road, they can build, but then at 1 block away, I've left it unzoned, and that way people won't build right here, and that way we don't have houses all along the main road. And that just makes it look a little bit neater, a little bit nicer, and it makes sure, and it ensures, whoops, we've missed a little spot here, it looks like. But it also ensures that we have the these back roads are dedicated to the people, and these are dedicated to the drivers. And tip number 10, use tree roads. Use roads with trees. Avenues are nice, but they should largely be used for the city. They're more pedestrian focused. So just these simple, roads with trees. I mostly have been using them for main roads, but what they allow me to do is they just create this little separation between, action-packed city, really tense highway, and, you sort of slow down here a little bit and ease into the residential area. So that is my 10th tip, is just using these roads with trees to create a little bit of separation between your highways and where people live. So those are my 10 tips for the city's skylines, suburban areas. If you enjoyed this video, please leave it a like, share it with other people who you think might be interested, comment with your ideas down below, subscribe to the channel so that I know that the channel is growing, with notifications on so that you know when videos come out, and until next time, have a nice day. Goodbye.